Hey everybody, Ryan here at Plague Scythe Studios. Welcome to the product overview and first-ish, second, third, 10th impressions video that I have directly been looking forward to making for almost a year at this point, and I guess indirectly since the genesis of this YouTube channel. As today I present to you the Fractal Audio Systems FM9. In late August of 2021, over 2 years after the release of the FM3, the FM9 was announced, much to the surprise of many, including myself. Not because I lacked any faith in Fractal Audio for producing a product like this, and it's not like I didn't predict something like this would come eventually, considering the power vacuum, quite literally, left between the FM3 and AX8 and because it does share a form factor, just like the FM3 with pre-existing Fractal Audio products, but because in the midst of an unprecedented chip shortage, it's kind of surprising to see, well, literally anyone put out many new products nowadays. I'm sure many of you that pre-ordered or followed the release schedule for the Neural DSP Quad Cortex are well aware of just how much that product was delayed due to the same reason. So it was kind of surprising that someone as relatively small as Fractal Audio would be putting out a new product around that time period. Now, just like a lot of their new product launches, this released with a wait list. And a lot of the people that signed up, within the first couple of hours got their units relatively quickly. Now, I jumped on the wait list as soon as I saw the announcement, and as fast as my little Neanderthal thumbs would take me through the checkout process. And even though I completed my registration in the early afternoon on the first day of this product's availability, I did not receive mine until the week of Thanksgiving the same year. 3 months, it's a bit to wait, but it's not exactly agonizing when you already have another product that fills a lot of the same ground. And quite frankly, it came sooner than I was ready in terms of my own personal projects and especially the stuff that I had planned for the channel. So it wasn't a big deal. As a result, I've been enjoying this thing consistently for the better part of 9 months and pretty much replaced everything I would normally use for my plug-in direct amplifier modeling duties, as one would expect as we'll go through this video. But a lot of the people were left in the dust for the past 9 months, and if you'd signed up on the wait list around September or so, it seemed absolutely hopeless that you would receive an FM9 at all at this point. However, about a week ago, as of recording this video, Fractal Audio once again surprisingly announced a new variant of the FM9, the Turbo, to sidestep the supply chain issues that they ran into with the original components on the FM9. Now, this yields a product that is essentially identical. It's the same functionality. You have the same inventory of blocks, so you don't get more reverbs or the ability to use more delay blocks or anything of that sort. But you do have 10% more processing power than what's even on this unit. And this unit is already roughly twice as powerful as an FM3, so add another 10% on there, and that's a significant chunk. Now, the downside is, A, you've been waiting for God knows how long, and B, it is at a $100 premium versus the stock FM9. Now, $1,700 might be a hard pill to swallow for some people, but if $1,600 wasn't going to break the bank for you, then what's another 100 if you can actually get the damn product in your hand, and at least you do get something in return. You know, that extra 10% power, I don't necessarily know that I would take advantage of it enough to warrant the extra $100, especially since you don't get any more I/O or anything of that sort. But considering the economy and rapid inflation and everything else, I'm hard pressed to say it's a bad value, considering otherwise you'll be waiting another untold amount of months just to get the base version. So before we dove too deep into this FM9 unit, which is the non-turbo version, I wanted to make that distinction because you'll likely see in the upper right corner of FM9 Edit that DSP usage, and if you end up purchasing the turbo version, it's likely going to be lower using the same preset, but not always, because this stuff does not scale linearly, especially when you're splitting reverbs and amp modeling across different cores. Some presets will use the exact same amount of processing power, and it may not be intuitive or make sense. On the other hand, for something like this, which almost caps out at that 80% mark, or you want to start making some optimizations, and make no mistake, this is a ridiculous signal chain that is totally convoluted, and I made explicitly for the intro to show just how many blocks you can throw at this unit and it still runs fine. This is ridiculous. On the turbo, you can probably add another 1 or 2 blocks. Now I'm using 2 delays here, and 2 reverbs and a multi-delay and a plex delay and a mega tap and a pitch block, and it's crazy. And you can still throw a couple more on the FM9, or instead of using the normal or low quality mode on, say, the cabinet preamp or the reverb block, you might be able to bump that up a couple points to the higher end settings and still be under that 80%, 85% threshold. So more is more is better. There is some way you will be able to take advantage of it, but for, I think, 95% of guitar player applications, this is going to cut it. And as we'll explore going through this, there's a lot of situations that I had to kind of make up to really stress this thing. Pretty much anything I want to do in terms of a single guitar chain or anything I would want to switch between in a single song, I can do within one preset and pretty much not have to make any major compromises. Maybe I have to turn the reverb down from ultra to high, or potentially turn the cabinet impulse response from ultra res to normal res every now and again. But as you'll probably see as we go through this video, there's really not a whole lot of ground left to cover between this unit and the AX8 for a single instrumentalist. I mean, sure, they did make the Turbo and the Mark II for some of the crazy artists out there that just have freaking everything in their presets, and they're using the full res IRs and that sort of stuff. There are applications for AX8 where it makes sense for a single guitarist or a single bassist to use that hardware. But for 95+% of people, they're never even going to scratch the surface of what that unit is capable of. And I think this is going to be a much better fit in terms of price, form factor, and just overall sensibility of the unit. With that, let's talk about the FM3 and FM9 kind of together, why I was super pumped for this unit, not so much for this one. We'll talk about some of the things that are the same and different, and then we'll dive into more of the software side. Now, one of the first things you're likely to notice coming from a last-gen Fractal audio device to one of these guys is the overall colorfulness of the unit. Obviously, it's still on a black chassis, but we have a full-color LCD screen, which compared to the ghosting monochrome green calculator screen of the AX8, this thing looks like a, OLED TV by comparison. Now, obviously, this is no 2160p HDR10 certified 120 hertz display, but it doesn't need to be. It's an amp modeler. It's totally fine, adequate, high contrast, and it looks rather nice. Some of the things that you can see in terms of its resolution actually do help playing guitar and making changes to presets on the fly. Like you can see LFOs moving, see, like frequency responses or like the impedance curve of the cabinet model you're choosing. Really cool stuff like that, the poor AX8 and AX2 would have zero chance of being able to replicate on that screen. And it does make a difference in usability, not just because, it's a little bit more modern, but because it makes stuff like, changing some of these quick parameters on the fly, like in your performance screen, or even going to a block in your layout, just quick stuff that I would be hard pressed to do on the AX8, I'm more confident here, not just because of the control scheme changes, but because, well, it's actually rather easy to see and results in a workflow and user experience that's far more comparable to the desktop editor than AX8 could ever think about being. Now, for a preset like this, I would not dare to try to build that on the unit itself. I'd still use the editor, but it can be done. And it's not that bad, especially if you're just using like a simple amp cap, couple pedals. It's not that big of a deal. But especially for minor changes, if you just want to go in here on the layout and, like edit this, and you want to change your cab IR real quick, or you want to, go back a couple pages and, you want to change the tone stack on the preamp you're using, or go to a different page entirely, change the mix on a delay. Super simple stuff that I kind of shied away from doing on the AX8 even. I basically used a couple of the quick buttons and like the amp tone stack and drive. That's it. Everything else I kind of set through the desktop software, and this is so much better to navigate in a live environment, or if you're in a studio that you don't have FM9 or FM3 edit hooked up with. Really knocked it out of the park when it comes to the display. Could it be better? Yeah, I guess. Honestly, the biggest potential quality of life improvement for me, either later down the road or on 4th gen devices, would be keyboard and mouse support. If I could plug in a ball mouse or a touchpad into this thing and just click around, I would use this unit's display more often than not. That would be fantastic. Not because it's the fastest way of doing it. You get used to the page buttons and the, your D-pad here. It'd be totally fine. But I just like a mouse. It's the way I'm used to rolling. And especially if you had to make like, edits on the fly, or before a gig, you just kind of, roll it around, do that all the time at work. So I'm not really sure where else they could go from here. It's totally functional. It's clean. It displays what you want it to, and kind of nothing else. I think Fractal kind of gets this unfair comparison to Apple in some ways because of the black box environment and closed off nature of their products. This to me is more like dealing with a Linux system, where it's like, here you go. Here's what you want. You can touch it if you want to. You can break it if you want to. But if you don't know what it does, just leave it alone. You're fine. Whereas I feel that some of the other companies that are going for this polished user experience that really sacrifices functionality in favor of touchscreen and maybe some haptic feedback, stuff that I just don't give a shit, honestly, about when it comes to an amp modeler. Just show me the information, make it clean, make it where I can see as much as possible on one screen without it being too cluttered, and then just get the rest of that crap out of here. See a lot of people that criticize Fractal's displays this day, and it's like, what do you want? What exactly can be better about it? And I'm sure there are ways to improve it, don't get me wrong, but just a lot of make it better, but they don't know how to make it better. Ultimately, that's all to say that as much as I enjoy the physical amp controls on the AX8, don't really miss them all that much, and I think they made the user experience so much more concise, easy to use with the larger scroll wheel and some of the dedicated buttons, as well as the soft buttons and scroll wheels here. So I think they knocked it out of the park when it comes to user interface on both of those units. Now for stuff that is kind of the same, but kind of different at the same time. That is the switches. Now, some of you might recall several years ago on the FM3 announcement, that was my biggest concern point, was going from a device that has ultimately 11 switches down to something that has 3. A lot of people were like, well, you're missing the point. These are multi-function switches. You can double tap, you can hold, you can do all this stuff, and that's great. But even if they all do 3 things at a time, 9 is still less than 11, and you don't have all those things simultaneously accessible. Now, there are definitely cases out there where the FM9 or even maybe the AX8's form factor is too large and has more switches than is useful for someone, and the more compact form factor and more effective switches are the better fit for people out there, and that's great. I'm glad the FM3 exists in that form factor and that price point for those people. But for me, who was spoiled to having anywhere between 6 to 8 scenes available at any one time, a click away on the AX8, be able to switch your bank and hold for tuner and all that sort of thing, I had a workflow that just felt super natural. And any product that was going to succeed the AX8 had to do everything it did and more. There's no, well, you can kind of do the same thing, but you got to go through these extra steps. And no, screw that. I want my cake and I want to eat it too. So with a very practical example, let me show you why, coming from the AX8, I had conceptual and have had physical issues navigating this thing. So this is a real preset I actually used on a full playthrough of an original song a few years back. And as I often do on the AX8, I set this up to have access to all the scenes from switches 1 through 8, except for scene 5, which I didn't use. And instead, I've mapped that switch to the second preset in the same bank. So I'm on preset 1 right now, and I press 2, and look at that. 7 more tones at, 1 more switch away. So as long as I'm within the same preset, I can go between any scene with one press. 1 to 3, 3 to 6, 6 to 4, 8 to 1, whatever. And I set this up in such a way that when the song flowed from one preset to the other and I had to change them, it would always go to the default scene and it would be on the tone I needed. There wouldn't be a secondary change. So I was essentially 2 clicks away from 14 different sounds. That's pretty huge on something that is otherwise this rudimentary. A lot of these switches you can do press and hold functions, like you can change the amp channel or disable the block altogether. But for the most part, this is kind of how I use this device. Point and click, go to this tone, done. Now, that's not the end of it because, of course, you have these other switches. You hold this one to access your tuner. You click it for the just tap tempo function. You press this one to be able to switch between different presets within the bank or go to different banks entirely. So even if I was on preset 1 here and I wanted to go down to another one, and let's just choose one here. But then a couple clicks on a whole other preset and I can do it all over again. And I can set all these up to, have a few scenes in my dry pedal and delay and reverb, or I can have 6 scenes and 1 reverb block that I can turn on and off at will, then 1 go to another preset. Super versatile. And I love this workflow. In contrast, let's try to do that now on the FM3. So right now we're on the scene layout, and we'll get into layouts versus views here in a minute. But if we want to go from scene 1 to scene 3, easy enough, right? 1, 2, 3, click, you're done. Cool. What if you want to go from scene 3 to scene 4, though? Well, there's no extra switch, right? So now we have to hold down that one, and we just move down a view. So we're still in the same layout. We're still looking at nothing but scenes, but when you press and hold the left and right switches, you can kind of think about it, at least I like to think about it, kind of like a scroll wheel where you're going through the next virtual page. View 1's over here now. We're looking at view 2, view 3's over here. So if I press this again, now we're on view 3. So effectively, to switch from scenes 3 to 4, it's a hold, scene 4. Do the same thing to go backwards. Now, you can plan for this ahead if you're playing live. If you're playing a chorus, you're going to go to a solo here in a minute, then you can go to the next view preemptively, then press it, and happy days, you've changed out immediately. But me personally, I've got enough to do when I'm playing guitar. I need all the help I can get. So the more simplified and streamlined this is, the better. And it only gets worse the more you try to change between more disparate scenes. So going from 1 to 7, that's 2 right there. You want to get your tuner, of course, you got to press that. And then, of course, you can go back to your original view. Now, let's say I want to rapidly change presets like I just did for the AX8. Now, we can go in here through FC per preset, and we could do some different hold functions and stuff like that and make it work. Where we could change between 440 and 441, maybe instead of using scene 8, we could do that just like we did with the AX8. But damn it, this thing has more channels on board. I want to use all 8 scenes, and it only took, a couple clicks to make that happen on the AX8 if I wanted to go between entirely disparate presets. And I could see a whole bank, I could see 8 at a time. So let's say we figure that out, but now we want to go from 440 to like 452. Okay, well, the way you're intended to use this is if you're on any of these sub layouts, you actually have to press and hold the middle button to go back to a master layout. And this is where you kind of have think of this like a subdirectory, right? In a Windows folder. This is your kind of root folder where you pick from a hierarchy, and this is where you start from the top. So we were in scenes. If I want to go back, hold master layout again, we can press presets. We can go through all the individual effects that are in here. You can see the reverb, delay. We can turn all that off. And that's great because we don't have to physically map anything. It's already done for you. It's there. That is a huge advantage over the AX8. That's awesome. But let's say from the scene screen, we want to change presets. Well, got to hold the middle one. There's one press. We got to press presets. Now, what did we say? We want to switch to like 552. We could have done that in 2 clicks on the AX8. So we're already kind of falling behind here. Let's go a bank plus 1, and maybe we'll do a bank plus 1, and we probably want to hit an empty one. And well, crap, I can't count. So is the center one's the last one? I don't know. Let's press up 445 because I lost track of where I was. Let's do that again. That one, 450, close enough, whatever. You see how many more presses it takes to do the same operation because you're going through different views to see it. Now, of course, you can go back and, you know, make some different layouts. And of course, there's a perform page that will make it easier if you use all these things. But at the end of the day, what I'm getting at is for a just basic, I want to go between 8 different sounds, which is a very reasonable use case for Fractal stuff, considering that you can pack so many sounds per preset. It's just kind of a pain in the ass on the FM3. Again, I love that there's all these subdirectories, these layouts that automatically populate for you, like the effects and the scenes and the utilities where you can just go to your tuner within a couple clicks, even from the home screen. All that's really great and really well thought out. But when you have to use all of these extra functions of the switch, like the press and hold and stuff like that, to even get to those screens, it kind of defeats the purpose of having multifunction switches, because you could just do more if you had more stupid switches like the AX8. So that's where my whole philosophical issue comes with the FM3. Now, what happens when you take that concept and multiply it by 3? Bliss. That's what you get. So when you boot this up, this is pretty much the layout that you're greeted with by default. Of course, you got over here, you can change banks up and down, and you'll see the 5 presets that are available to you there. I'm on the center one right now, but if I wanted to switch 10 presets, you know, pretty easy. Just a couple clicks, you're there. Whatever preset you're on, you always have the scenes available. When you press scenes, look, all 8 right there. It doesn't matter if you're using them or not. They're all there automatically. You don't have to lay them out in a custom fashion. Of course, the scribble strips have them named. That's pretty badass. Right back to presets if you want to change that. Going to this button, tap tempo, you hold it down for your tuner, it's all there. Now, this is just going through the default layouts they give you, and of course you're using a couple of the switches to bounce back and forth. So let's say you want more functionality. Well, instead of holding a center button, you do this heel-toe action over here, and that opens up your master view. This is one you probably shouldn't change, just like the FM3 master layout, but you can go through all sorts of stuff, like your tap tempo looper effects, more effects, just like the effects screen over there. And I've actually mapped some of this stuff on the base layout to where I don't even have to go to this screen. Under the scenes layout, for example, if I hold down the first switch, look at that, I'm on the effects screen. Of course, go to more effects, I can heel toe again or do another custom binding if I want to change something even more rapidly. Go to presets and I hold down, say the second one. We'll probably go to something else, more effects already. I go back to presets, hold down the third one. We're at the looper, and I just bypass like 2 more clicks to get there. This is a game changer. In every conceivable and measurable way, the FM9 is a huge upgrade over prior floor controllers of the AX8 2 generation, and especially the AX8. You can do everything you did on the AX8 from one screen, and then with a couple clicks, maybe even as few as 1, you are on a whole new screen with way more information that you don't even have to configure yourself. It's already there, and you can do whatever you want when you customize it. This is the ultimate implementation. This is the end of the road when it comes to this vision. It makes so much more sense now, and I love the switches as a result. When it comes to the FM3, kind of at a loss, because there's going to be an argument that, yeah, just add a FC6 to it, and then you get the same thing. But not really, because this has twice the power, and there's a good chance that if you're using the FM3 the way it's kind of intended to, you may not even need that many switches. And even if you do buy the FC6, a couple more $100 will get you this device which has more power. Now, if you need to split them apart for a fly gig or something, okay. But I would have honestly rather they just chop this part off and save me the $150 and just have this be a desktop unit and sell it separately with a FC6 if you needed it later. Because as is, the switches are just so gimped on this product, whereas this is just a home run. Continuing on the theme of the same but better brings us to the I/O. Everything that's on the FM3 is here, and there's even a lot of stuff from the AX8 3 that's here. Even the stuff that is relatively similar between the FM3 and 9 has been expanded on this unit. Of course, we have MIDI in and out, a USB audio interface, this time in an 8x8 configuration instead of 4x4 on the FM3, meaning you can simultaneously record more tracks coming in and send more coming out. I think this could be really useful as using this device kind of like a virtual effects loop, or you just want to mix all sorts of different tracks in that have different amounts of, you know, echo here, modulation there, and kind of do a wet, dry, wet thing. You'll find a use for it. In addition to the FM3 and AX8's SPDIF output, which is my favorite way to record these devices, this has an input as well. Again, you want to use this as a virtual effects loop, or you know, reamp digital guitars coming in without any need for an analog conversion. I've already used it that way. It's great. Of course, fast link, you want to connect this to an FC6 or 12. Probably won't need it, but you know, if you like having access to literally everything in front of you, then there you go. Also has the headphone jack, which is kind of optional on some of the earlier FM3s. Mine has it, but there it is. Pedals 1, 2, and 3. This can't accept 2 at a time like the FM3 does, where that one can kind of hold 4. But once again, what are you really doing? You probably don't need it anyway. 2 or 3 expression pedals is all you really want. And you know, all your other switches will do everything else you need, I think. This is where stuff starts getting interesting though. Whereas this has 2 outputs, one main, one you can use as an effects loop or route out to, you know, say a stage monitor, or kill your cabinet impulse sound and put that to a live guitar cab on stage. This has 3, which is not as many as the Axe FX 3's 4 outputs. Man, that's kind of a tongue twister to say. This edition brings about all sorts of possibilities that I only dreamed about with the AX8, and we do not have time to cover that stuff in depth today. That definitely deserves a few more videos in the future. But stuff like being able to simultaneously run 4-cable method on an amp, send one side direct front of house and send another side to an onstage guitar cabinet, you could do that. Because one loop would be the amp, another loop would be the cab, and then your main outputs would go to front of house. You could really play 3 amp sounds, actually 4 amp sounds at the same time, because you'll have 2 amp blocks here. You could put 2 amps direct there. You could have 2 separate pedal loops, all sorts of crazy stuff. Whatever you decide to do with them, you have 2 output sections with XLR connections. The other ones are just TRS or TS, whichever you want to use them as. And this is probably all you'll need anyway for balanced. What is the fun addition to me on the input side of this, finally brings us to some more tones since the beginning of this video, is the instrument input. Now on the FM3 and AX8, there's this fixed 1 mega ohm buffered input that has an input pad setting. Go from anywhere to 0 to like -24 or something crazy. And basically, it doesn't really change the incoming level of your guitar signal as far as the amp modeling is concerned, but it's a digital, or analog rather, to digital conversion, and that pad kind of controls the signal to noise level. Now you can clip the input, as you'll see on these meters, and you want to kind of get it closer to red to maximize your signal to noise ratio, but it doesn't really make that big of a difference overall. And the downside to that is that if you're plugging into this device and you have like something like a fuzz pedal or a treble booster, a lot of these low impedance pedals that expect a guitar to load, they don't really sound the same, and they're more brittle, and it's just wrong. The volume roll-off behavior is totally different. The frequency response is wrong, and it's just another little ding to an otherwise really nice amp modeling package. However, the FM9 and AX8 just like the AX2, has variable impedance and variable capacitance circuitry. So whatever your first pedal is in the chain, let's say we put like a fuzz face or that aforementioned treble booster, and you leave that to auto, it's actually going to switch to like a 90K input impedance versus a 1 mega ohm. And you can even add in the virtual capacitance of a long 10-foot, 12-foot cable by selecting one of those options. And it makes a difference, a huge difference. As a result of that implementation, there's, instead of an input pad setting, this continuous gain control, which basically, anytime you turn it up on the analog side, it's going to get turned down on the digital side. So you can still optimize your signal to noise ratio in that way, but it's just a different way of doing it versus the FM3 or AX8. So let's see what that sounds like when you use that vintage pedal with a low input impedance. Discussing and demonstrating the sound signature of the FM9 is simultaneously the easiest and hardest part, because on the one hand, we kind of heard a lot of what it's capable of by demonstrating the FM3 new sounds in several videos back, if you want to check that out and hear some of the new models that have accompanied the 3rd gen Fractal audio systems firmware. And of course, I also compared that to the AX8. So you've heard a lot of what this can do, but on the other hand, being that this can run 2 amp blocks at the same time and so many more effects, there is exponentially more options theoretically that you can do versus the FM3. Now, the way that I take advantage of that capability tends to translate into a few different permutations. I'm either hard panning amp blocks to get different stereo sounds, I'm mixing them in mono to get kind of this layered thing going on, or I'm using 1 amp block at a time, but having access to more than 4 amp sounds within one preset. And if you set them up correctly, you can even kind of switch to them without hardly any dropout at all. Now, you can be really smart about this and have a couple of them going simultaneously and use like a volume block and a panning modifier and all this stuff. There's some really slick tricks that people have done. But I want to show you kind of worst case scenario in a lot of this stuff in the way that I think a lot of people are just going to quickly set up presets and roll with it. Before we get into the switching times of the amps and other effects, though, I wanted to throw this out here really quickly because I don't know where else to put it, quite frankly. There was at one time a disparity between the pitch block on the FM3 and the AX8 and it was kind of a big deal to a lot of people in terms of the latency, the sound quality, and it kind of got snuck in there at one point on the FM3. Now it pretty much measures and sounds identically, but I don't think that anybody from Fractal has really acknowledged that. However, they did acknowledge that the AX3 pitch block is on this device. So when that was a bigger deal, had in my outline of this video to show that off specifically. So I'm going to do that. If nothing else, the takeaways are: 1, the pitch block sounds the same as its big brother, and 2, switching between different models within the same pitch block going from different channels, say like one's a whammy up, one's a whammy down, one's just a pitch shift with the virtual capo. All that stuff is pretty much instantaneously. It is actually. So you don't have to worry about that for a lot of these effects. If you're sticking with the same amp sound and you're just going between different drives or wet effects, you're probably not going to hear any pop in or pop out using the FM9. That's better than real pedals a lot of the time. When the FM9 was first announced, the software features that I was most excited for were definitely the aforementioned dual amp blocks and the full 6x14 grid that accompanied it. As the FM3 only has a 4x12 grid to put your layout in, this has basically this whole 2x whatever L shape in addition to that, which is great if you're going to be splitting off into parallel signal paths and you don't need like the send and return block to, move this down if your serial signal chain is any larger. So to kind of dive into that slowly, I'm going to go through a few different scenes in one dual amp presets. There's going to be a lot of pre-effects on these. I'm going to hard pan, or mostly hard pan, 2 different amp sounds left and right, kind of keep those amps on at all times, but then switch between different effects, especially drives and wet effects, compressors, things like that. And you're going to hear that going between them, there's basically like zero gap on a lot of these drives and stuff. So if you're kind of a play pedals into a mostly clean amp platform kind of guy, I think you're going to be able to get a zero pop-in time continuous sound out of this platform. And as you'll see with the CPU overhead, you're barely going to scratch the limit of what this device can do if you mimic a real guitar rig. Now let's listen to some more examples with the amp blocks being dynamically switched. So sometimes we'll just be going from one block to the other, and it'll be an instantaneous switch, all in kind of a mono signal path. Sometimes they'll be hard panned. Sometimes we'll be switching from hard pan to more of a mono type layer, and about everything in between. And what you'll notice is that it all kind of depends on what your signal chain's doing. If you're going from one channel to another, or if you're sticking between the same channels and just switching blocks, there may be like no switch time at all. Sometimes it's quite aggressive. I find the more different channels you use, it seems like that switch time keeps going up, as you'll see in that second preset. But especially with the first one, it's hardly noticeable. And honestly, I have more amplifiers in real life that take longer to change channels due to the analog dropout of relays than this device does, and especially covered up by, delay and reverb trails a lot of the time. So this can do a lot that you simply wouldn't be able to do in real time in any other way. A lot of these things would be the equivalent of some guy at front of house twiddling the pan knobs and turning volumes in a way that it just would be totally impractical, and yet you can do it here and pretty much instantaneously. So this is how the amp block can be configured and how different your results may be. Finally, let's zero in on that layering and double tracking aspect of dual amplifier tones. So I'm gonna have a couple presets, one guitar, one bass focused, especially with the guitar stuff. It's gonna be more rhythm sound focused. And again, you can hear how even using the same basic amp block, just switching and panning and adding a little bit of pitch modulation and delay can give you this almost faux double tracking sound, or an almost quad tracking type sound if you, again, double tracked that core tone. Sounds confusing, but it's something you could ultimately implement in a live environment if you dial in one amp sound just underneath the other one, and again, add a little bit of time delay in there too, just to separate things out. I think this is most useful for bass guitars if we take the methodology I showed off in the Parallel Signal Paths edition of Explained and add yet another layer to it. So in that version, I have kind of a low clean signal and a high distorted signal. On this one, I'm gonna add an even more extremely distorted mid sound, kind of bouncing overdriven SVTs with the dark glass model on here. And then we can split off even more parallel paths. I'll add some sub-octave generation and a little bit of enhancement on some of the high end just to give it some stereo width with places where guitars might start to melt in with the mix. And then you still got power left over. Add a couple more scenes, you can get something that's a little grittier and cleaner, and then one that's like totally, completely clean and still have room for reverb. The amount of processing power you have on this device for any instrument is just too much to wrap your head around if you're coming from an FM3 or especially an AX8. And it's not like you have to come up with some contrived scenario to push this thing to its DSP limits, but it has kind of rewired my brain in some ways to undo a lot of the things that I taught myself to do on the AX8 to, save resources, or, this is the 80 for 20 result. Here it's like, screw it, man. Turn that reverb up, add the ultra high quality on the cabinet block and ultra res impulse responses and all that, because most of the time you can. And it just really in that way feels like a zero compromises device. I could quite literally go on all day about the FM9. This is, in my opinion, the crowning achievement of Fractal Audio's roadmap when it comes to floorboard modelers. And I'm so glad they put this out. Even if only a few people got a hold of it initially, I'm so glad to have had it for those first 8-9 months. And I'm even gladder that people out there can get an even more powerful version of this thing, because that's awesome. Again, I'm not interested in an upgrade. I want those units to go to people that will not only take advantage of that extra power, but will be able to use an FM9 at all, that have not been, as I've been enjoying mine. I mean, what's there left to say? This thing just absolutely does everything the AX8 and FM3 did and takes it to a whole new level. And it does not feel contrived. It doesn't feel like any corners were cut. You know, you put an expression pedal on this thing and it's your rig in every possible measurable way. It does not feel like I'm making any meaningful sacrifices. And I could push this a little harder in some directions, of course, but I mean, I just don't know how they're going to outdo this one. 3 amp blocks, you know, instantaneous channel switching for some applications. I don't know. I really don't. In a lot of ways, I wish they would have released this unit first. It kind of goes in the order we're used to seeing in technology in general, where the Halo product is released and you get the more consumerized versions going down. In another way, though, I'm glad more people got to, you know, experience 3rd gen Fractal audio at a lower price point with the FM3. Because again, for most people, I think that's all they need, especially if you ignore the foot switch side of things. And I imagine this not being in their product stack for a couple years pushed more people towards the high end than otherwise it might have, and probably ended up selling more FM3s as a result, you know, because I think a lot of people like me would have been like, well, what, you know, for $600 less, look how much you're cutting out. And it kind of makes it look a little worse than it actually is in comparison when you put the numbers next to each other. So with the ever increasing costs that we're living through and the competition out there, you know, you look at something that's like, wow, $1,700. You know, that's almost double what the AX8 was, but it's over double what the AX8 is in terms of its power, in terms of its per preset capability, the switches, the inputs, outputs. This doesn't just feel like, oh, well, I'll make my live tones on this device and it'll be good enough and I'll still record with real amps or VST plugins. No, this is it. Like, this is the do-it-all thing for me. Of course, there are areas I wish Fractal would continue to improve. Hell, even between recording some of these demos and making this video, they came out with a Klon Centaur model, which I'd never thought was going to happen. I thought that was memed to the ground and Cliff was basically over that. But here, you know, it showed up. So maybe some of those wish list items like more solid state amplifiers could come true. But we're at the point now where we're kind of at a crossroads where this thing sounds so good and it's so realistic and it has so much to offer in terms of signal chain complexity and the models available that's like, man, I wish you all would just commit and do it all. I wish there was a band effects processor that just handled everything. I would buy it immediately and it would take care of a lot of gear purchases for me. But as is, it's a no compromise guitar and bass rig. What's there not to like? If you can afford it, if you enjoy the AX8 or you liked what you heard out of 2nd and 3rd gen Fractal and just thought, this is, you know, this is not the form factor, I can't afford it right now, do it. Just do it, okay? I have more content planned in the future. They'll kind of be comparing the 3rd gen Fractal stuff to some of its older competition. But I'm gonna go ahead and tell you right now, this is my favorite. This is the pinnacle. And what they're doing just puts so many in the industry to absolute shame. I'm looking forward to the progress that others are making as well, but Cliff and team, man, glorious product. So glad you put it out, and I can't wait to be using this for the next, hopefully, 5 to 10 years. I'm out of breath, guys. This was a long one. I don't think this quite topped the Kemper review, but there's a lot to this. So surely you guys don't have any more questions. Please go somewhere else. The forums, Leon, Matt Picone. I don't know. I can't do it right now. And with that, we will see you with more future Fractal content at some point. Thank you so very much for watching. Bye.